Om, may He protect us both together. May He nourish us both together, you and me. May we work conjointly with great energy. May our study be vigorous. May it be effective. May we not unnecessarily cavil with each other. Peace, peace, peace be with all. So, happy Ramakrishna Jayanti to start with, actually his birthday, put it that way. And secondly, happy Shrove Tuesday. So, we have to see how we can match these together. In addition to that, we're commencing a new chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, because Tuesday, as you know, is reserved to the study of the Srimad Bhagavad Gita. And we are now in a section which deals with the principles and philosophy of what is called jnana, the knowledge portion. Just to review, the 18 chapters in the Bhagavad Gita covers every aspect that we can think of. It covers your day-to-day working life, karma yoga. It covers the principles of it initially. It covers meditation, and it covers more recently bhakti yoga, the yoga of non-demanding love. As you know, human love is demanding, but the ideal love is non-demanding. And so we are celebrating Sri Ramakrishna, who was the embodiment of love. And we've just had a brief meditation that is an image of this body of pure love. For why else do these descendants, these avatars, these people these great waves, as Swami Purnananda describes it, come down, descend, as it were, to human level, teach mankind for thousands and thousands of years a message relevant to the age that will help to stabilize our harmonious life. Nature itself is in harmony. Nature itself is running with perfect rhythm, and what religion calls God is that balancing power, that principle behind everything, responsible for a flow of harmony everywhere. Only in man's area do we find discord. Why do we find discord in our area? It's because we have the skills and capacity to manufacture harmony from discord. If you ask what is a human being, you might find is a kind of multifaceted, multi-purpose entity that has the capacity to take all the discord and manufacture harmony with it. And a long-standing story I normally tell about it is about the farmer that had to get his water from a river and had to go through his neighbor's field. And if you know the story, then you know that his neighbor was fond of ambushing him on a daily basis. So the farmer would go collect the water, and the neighbor, with a little bit of a malicious sense of humor, would ambush him every day with a bucket of cow dung. He never knew where it was coming from. Sometimes the neighbor would hide behind a rock, throw it. Others up a tree, throw it. In any event, the farmer got used to it, and every day got a dousing of manure. And then, of course, he would collect the water. After about 1 year of this, he knocked on the neighbor's door. Neighbor opened it, a little sheepishly looked, and there was the farmer with the rose flower. He said, I want to present this to you. All that cow dung you gave me, I planted a rose garden, and here's a flower. I'm going to give it to you on one condition. What's that? Says the neighbor. This coming year, will you please double the quota? So with all the discord and so-called problems in life, designed in such a way that it does not exceed our capacity to deal with it, we have this ability to transform all the discord and make a harmony from it. That's our job. And with this we have God's grace flowing to help us. We do the minimum. And the divine grace pouring out through us, pouring out in and through thought, pouring out in and through energy, pouring out in and through movement, and all the resources necessary for our growth and development, does the lion's share of it. So it is true that every time we move, let's say 2-3 paces toward our own inner divinity, that divinity moves even more toward us. This is called God's grace. Through God's grace, we have these giant waves that appear, there being only one ocean, and distributing all the resources necessary around himself. Like a sun beaming different rays for the benefit of all, generously distributing grace everywhere and creating a sense of upliftment and joy. Like somebody coming with a party of revelers and leaving only joy in its wake. And so Sri Ramakrishna, in his various episodes of his life, comes to one very important section, his sadhana, his spiritual practice. And he starts off with forms as a beginner's model. Please take some form. Take whatever form you like. Pour your heart and soul into it. And in his case, make any variation you like with a kind of sporting attitude, a kind of sense of experimentation, and coming to a same profound conclusion, whichever way he turns. And then we find, in 1864, Sri Ramakrishna is 28 years of age, we find this naked monk appearing in Dakshinaswar with only a loincloth, namta, sky-clad. One of the most profound pieces of literature that we can study today, and now we have a library full of it, is the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. In beautiful English, not quite, I'm told, matching the Bengali of the Kathamrita, but comprehensive enough for us to understand day-to-day conversations and understand the deep meaning that we find therein by reflection. So we have a habit of handing somebody this Gospel of Ramakrishna and saying, please open it anywhere at random. Anywhere at random means that if we let go of our personal motivation and our personal ego and become an open channel, as it were, for God's grace to flow through, be prepared to do that, then the Lord of the universe, in its wisdom, will select exactly the right passage for you. And there you can read. Reading means following a line of study that is Vedantic. That means we listen to what is there. That is, we have it read, or read it ourselves. And it's not a novel. No scripture is a novel. It has to be listened to, that is, absorbed. It then has to be reflected on. It has to be reasoned out. It has to conform to our understanding and logic. And then we have to feel it. We have to connect with it. That is through meditation. So it's not simply a question of reading. You ask somebody, what did you read? Oh, I read the entire Bhagavad Gita. Very good. Did you study it? So the study of it is a very important thing. This Shravana, Manana, and this Nididhyasana, this reflection, turns into meditation to understand the deep and profound meaning of it. To stand where the person, the divine entity delivering the message stands. So such a message, of course, was delivered in this Bhagavad Gita some 5,000 years ago or so, so they say. And now we have a message contained in this Gospel of Ramakrishna. Some call it the fifth Veda. And in this we find a very, very important introduction by Swami Nikhilananda describing the episode where Sri Ramakrishna and Totapuri meet. So it goes like this. Totapuri arrived at the Dakshinaswar temple garden toward the end of 1864, and then it goes on to say that perhaps he was born in Punjab and so on, having many, maybe 700 sannyasis under him. But Totapuri met Ramakrishna and immediately discovered that Ramakrishna was willing to absorb this message of Advaita Vedanta, non-dualistic Vedanta. There's a great misunderstanding about non-dualism. And when people use these two terms, non-dualism and Vedanta, as equivalent terms, of course it can be used in this way, but really non-dualism is just the summit of Vedanta. It is the final conclusion of Vedanta. It is a supplementary position. Every position is valid. Each one is supplementary. And so, Totapuri comes with nothing, sky-clad, with complete sense of renunciation, giving up all possessions, giving up all attachments. In this way he comes and he sees a willing disciple, and Ramakrishna agrees to his proposal. But of course he seeks the permission of the Divine Mother. Of course, when Totapuri hears that he has to get permission from his mother, he thinks that it is his biological mother. And in fact, of course, it's the Divine Mother of the universe in the form of Mother Kali. So, Sri Ramakrishna agrees to renounce the whole world, but with the stipulation that the ceremony of initiation, his initiation into the monastic order, be performed in secret, because he didn't want to upset his own biological mother. So we are told on the appointed day, in the small hours of the morning, the fire was lit in the place where Ramakrishna had planted these trees, the Panchavati, and Totapuri and Sri Ramakrishna sat before this. And the flame played on their faces, beautifully described. Ramakrishna was a small brown man, says this commentary, with a short beard and beautiful eyes. We can just imagine being there and imagine seeing this beautiful figure. Long dark eyes, he says, full of light, obliquely set and slightly veiled, never very wide open, but seeing half closed, a great distance, both outwardly and inwardly. Outwardly and inwardly is the theme of the 13th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. Because you see, in order to endorse our reality, two things are perceived, or two things are encountered. The objects perceived. It can be something like a body, or something like a chair or a table, or an event. Something that is relayed to the sense organs. Or it could be an inward movement. It could be part of the mental field. Something like a feeling. And the mental field is something that can be watched. So during the process of a guided meditation, we see that it is useful often to watch the behavior of all the traffic going on in the mental field without changing it. And knowing that there is an inner drive with all of us toward perfection, whether we like it or not, whether we know it or not, sooner or later we can rely on the fact that the mind by itself will settle. And when the mind settles nicely, then our attention is available to be steered in chosen ways. These chosen ways are now called concentration. And we can take the mind on a pleasant journey using beautiful scenes in our memory that have been chosen. Maybe scenes from a pilgrimage, maybe scenes that have given us the greatest maximum joy, maybe scenes from nature or events. In our guided meditation this evening, it was imagining being in the presence, physical presence of this great avatar, this Ramakrishna. It was very interesting that in Paris, one question was asked, how do we overcome in the spreading of the Vedanta the resistance from Western people about Hindu culture in the whole environment of the spread of the Vedanta message? Very interesting question. And then, is Ramakrishna accepted? And my answer is, well, we don't necessarily teach Ramakrishna. Of course, for devotees we do it. But for those people who want to know the nature of their own being and who want the universal message of Vedanta that unites everybody everywhere, following the lines of Sri Ramakrishna himself and Swami Vivekananda, there's no need to change your religion. There's no need to convert to anything. There's no need to adopt any cultural things. And here's Totupuri rejecting all rituals. So when you ask about Ramakrishna, everybody claims him to be theirs. Ramakrishna was a great tantric, great tantrika. No, he was of course, but he was more than this. He was everything to everyone and set a model. What is that model? We start off with the chosen form. Then we go into complete formlessness. And then Sri Ramakrishna decides to go back and use the forms, declaring that this supreme entity is both with form and formless. That means he's available to everybody. Even if you're an atheist, he's available. It makes no difference. This is the true harmony of religions that Sri Ramakrishna teaches us by the model of his own life. This introduction describes, in the burning flame before him, Sri Ramakrishna performed the rituals of destroying his attachment to relatives, friends, body, mind, sense organs, ego, and the whole world. And the leaping flame swallowed it all. This beautiful descriptive language used, making the initiate free and pure. The sacred thread and the tuft of hair were consigned to the fire, and completing his severance from caste, sex, and society, last of all, he burnt in that fire with all that is holy as his witness, his desire for enjoyment here and hereafter. He uttered the sacred mantras, giving assurance of safety and fearlessness to all beings, who were only manifestations of his own self. The rites completed, the disciple received from the Guru the loincloth and the ochre robe and the emblems of new life. And this, of course, today, anybody then who follows the same line and tradition of the Ramakrishna order will declare, we trace our origins, so they say, way back to Shankaracharya through Totapuri. If that doesn't satisfy you, then Shankaracharya also had teachers. So that Swami Vivekananda, in his address to the Parliament of Religions, was able to declare that his message was on behalf of the most ancient order of monks in the world, the most ancient order of sannyasins. So the teacher and the disciple repair to the meditation room nearby, and Totapuri began to impart to Sri Ramakrishna the great truths of Vedanta. Brahman, he said, is the only reality ever pure, ever illumined, ever free, beyond the limits of time and space and causation. But can we grasp it? This philosophy says you are not bound. There are many, many poems, many beautiful mystic verses that tell us how we are bound like a bird in a cage. Such verses were repeated to Sri Ramakrishna, And he said, why bound? Why in a cage? Why like a bird? Why not free? We are free. We are always free. There's nothing to connect to. We're already connected. There's nothing to get. We already have it. It's just a question of cleaning and purifying the mind. And with that, we have sufficient discernment, discrimination to find out what is this true entity called ourself. So a beautiful example is there, which I often give. And don't worry if I'm repeating this. You get used to me repeating quite a few things. But you see, supposing a great dignitary comes to visit this country, supposing it is a great royal personage that comes, naturally what you'll do is you'll whitewash all the graffiti in Dublin. You'll make sure it's all wiped out. You'll take all the heroin addicts and all the homeless people and you'll put them away nicely somewhere. So the royal dignitary will travel through a seemingly, socially free zone with no social problems. Flags will be put out. Now, supposing you go into the Dublin, you notice all the flags of the various nations, 2 nations, Irish nation and whatever other nation this dignitary comes from. You'll see all the streets are cleaned. You'll see even temple bars sparkling. You find all of the graffiti is missing. You'll find everybody smiling and happy and cheering. So the question is this. This royal dignitary, when you see all the flags and so on, has this dignitary to come, say tomorrow, or later in the day, or has the dignitary, is it here already? Because if the dignitary is here already, you won't go and put the graffiti back, you won't go and put the rubbish back in the streets, you won't take the flags down, all the flags being there, all the graffiti missing, all the whole of Dublin arranged so beautifully. So we say, this dignity has come already, is already here. It's not to come. There's no expectation of God to come. When is the king coming? When is the queen coming? Look out the window. Coming yet? No. Next one? No. Next one? Change my religion, change my guru, change my mantra. It's not that this is to come. That already is here. And the Bhagavad Gita calls this knower. The knower, the witness. Of what? Of the field in front. Knowing that 2 things should be registered. This objective field in front on the one hand, comprising the internal movements and external events, and the witness, knower, that perceives it. In modern science today, the materialist asks this question. A man called David Chalmers, an Australian philosopher and neuroscientist, says, consciousness is a hard problem, he declares. Well, it's only a hard problem if you don't do the analysis. That means if your mind is not pure enough to discriminate between the knower and the witness and the field of observation, the subject and the object. The whole of meditation is this distinction, subject-object, subject-object, until both merge into one thing and no distinction remains. So Tutupuri is trying to teach Sri Ramakrishna this. And so the remarkable thing is, he asked the disciple to withdraw his mind from all objects of the relative world, including all the forms of deities, gods, goddesses, and so on, and to concentrate on the absolute. But how easy is that? Take away all form, take away all shapes, take away all names, all identities, take away all time, what are you left with? This position says there's no evolution. There's only a totality. So with a little bit of fun and a sparkle in my eye, when somebody says, do you believe in evolution? Challenge me to a scientific position. I say no, mainly the shock factor and the fun of it. But no, I don't believe in evolution. I believe in totality. What looks like evil, an evolving thing, is the totality as seen through time, because we can't see a totality. So this whole absolute, difficult to conceive, you can't conceive of it. It is inconceivable. It has to be experienced. But the task was not easy, even for Sri Ramakrishna. He found it impossible to take his mind beyond Kali, the Divine Mother of the universe. And after the initiation, Sri Ramakrishna once said, describing the event, Nangta began to teach me the various conclusions of the Advaita Vedanta, that there are no two. That is our final conclusion. Only one thing exists. We call it Brahman. And Atman is the same as Brahman. And how do we know this? Because when we look at all the things that change, the external world changes, the internal world changes. In contrast to that, something remains. It never changes. And so, the final conclusion of Advaita says, not only that there is only one reality, Brahman, that the reality in you is one with this, but this world is just an appearance. This world is mithya. There's no reality to this world. It only looks like that. It looks like that because we are conditioned for it. Without that conditioning, the world stops. Without that conditioning, the race does not continue. Without this conditioning, you and I will not be here to discuss it. Because under the spell of this, we came into being. And on the spell of this, we continue our life. And we try to make this life less and less complex. We try and unscramble this life. And we can do it successfully. Because the laws of physics do not apply to man. The laws of physics do not apply to man in depth. The laws of physics say things have to get more complicated, more scrambled. And the evidence for that is death. This philosophy says you can transcend death because you are never born, says this philosophy. So how do we get to this lofty conclusion? We follow the model of Sri Ramakrishna. We take beginning steps. We use the forms. We understand that when we come close to this form and feel it, then this nearness becomes oneness. And then we experience in reality, not a concept, but we experience the reality of pure being. So Nangta began to teach the various conclusions of this Advaita Vedanta and asked me, says Ramakrishna, to withdraw the mind completely from all objects and dive deep down into the Atman. But in spite of all my attempts, I could not altogether cross the realm of name and form and bring my mind to the unconditioned state. Such a lofty soul as Sri Ramakrishna himself finds it difficult. It gives us all hope. Then he says, I had no difficulty in taking the mind from all the objects of the world, but the radiant and too familiar figure of the blissful mother, the embodiment of the essence of pure consciousness, appeared before me as a living reality. As a living reality, not a mere concept, as an actual entity. But still that sense of separateness was there. And even after the realization, as we will see, of this non-dual state, what we find is he makes a conscious choice to stay on this semi-dualistic position. You stay in a mood of bhava. So, her bewitching smile prevented me from passing into the great beyond. Again and again I tried, but she stood in my way every time. In despair, I said to Nangta, it is hopeless. I cannot raise my mind to the unconditioned state and come face to face with Atman. He grew excited and sharply said, "What? You can't do it, but you have to." He says you have to because he knows he can. He cast his eyes around. Finding a piece of glass, he took it up and stuck it in between my eyebrows. "Concentrate the mind on this point," he thundered. Then, with a stern determination, I again sat to meditate. See what a wonderful, strong will this Nocta had. As soon as the gracious form of the Divine Mother appeared before me, I used my discrimination as a sword, and with it clove her in two. And he could do it, I can add, because of his purity of mind. Purity of mind because he systematically practiced this sadhana, and this purity was there from his childhood already. The last barrier fell. My spirit at once soared beyond the relative plane, and I lost myself in samadhi. Not only did he lose himself in samadhi, but he lost himself in samadhi for some 6 months. A most unusual feat. Sri Ramakrishna remained completely absorbed in samadhi for 3 days at that point. "Is it really true?" Totapuri cried out in astonishment. "Is it possible that he has attained in a single day what it took me 40 years of strenuous practice to achieve?" Great God, it is nothing short of a miracle. And with the help of Totapuri, Sri Ramakrishna's mind finally came down to the relative plane. And Totapuri, a monk of the most orthodox type, never stayed at a place more than 3 days. But he remained at Dakshinaswar 11 months. He too had learned something. Totapuri had no idea of the struggles of ordinary men in the toils of passion and desire. And having maintained all through life the guilelessness of a child, he laughed at the idea of man's being led astray by the senses. He was convinced that the world was Maya, just an appearance, and had only to be denounced to vanish forever. He was a born non-dualist, and he had no faith in a personal God. But he did not believe in the terrible aspect of Kali, much less in her benign aspect. Music and the chanting of God's holy name were to him only so much nonsense. He ridiculed the spending of emotion on the worship of a personal God. But Sri Ramakrishna convinced him otherwise. And so he became Totapuri's teacher, actually, in this regard. That both this relative world and this transcendent existence are both real in their own way, one in a relative way, and one in a completely absolute way. So this is the remarkable life of Sri Ramakrishna. And so a brief overview in the context of this. In the context of this, we can pick up some headlines of this 13th chapter, a most remarkable chapter in the Bhagavad Gita. It is the yoga of the discrimination of these two things, the subjective world, kshetra, called a field of experience, and kshetrajna, kshetrajna vibhaga yoga, the yoga of the discrimination of these two things. From here on, therefore, we find the next 6 chapters are elucidating the principles of this whole Vedanta philosophy. You cannot do any practice without principles. And you cannot have principles without the practice. The two go together. The principles, you might say, are a little intellectual until you understand the real content of it, the real logic of it, but also the feeling of it, in which case the emotions start catching up. It is the emotional catch-up which we call the practice. Emotional catch-up means that we connect with the reality more and more, and it is on the feeling level. For example, in meditation, if you just form a picture, then you won't get anywhere. So we start off with a kind of running commentary, And then in the running commentary, we form pictures. This is called Namarupa. But when there's no feeling attached to it, then all we have is the picture coming first, followed by a background commentary. Monotony sets in, and possibly sleep. So, there are a number of subjects in this great chapter. First of all, we have to understand that this external world and this internal witness entity is really everything. It constitutes everything. This we have to understand. That also, this principle becomes a vehicle for our revelation. And then the question is asked, what is the constitution of this field? It's a remarkable thing that this whole episode of this Bhagavad Gita takes place on a battlefield. And so we can see how clever it is in its layers of meaning. Because we can see that the body is a certain field, physical field. And it's a physical field that is made up of all the other elements we find in nature. It's just in a different variety, just reconstituted in such a way that it becomes a useful, unique instrument. Two instruments being there, body and mind. And with this we proceed forward. So we find that it is important to understand and make this distinction, constantly making it, to understand what is what. Otherwise we get caught up in a misidentification. And in the internal world, we get caught up in emotion, in a reaction. All of our various internal movements are comprised of essentially our reactions to something. And when these reactions are negative, it produces a negative world for us. What is the practicality of all of this? Practicality is that thought is a powerful and rapid movement. Nothing moves quicker than thought. Not even light beams move quicker than thought. And thought then has the immediate effect of mobilizing and reconstitution all the subtle elements of life. A very important passage we find in the great text on Advaita Vedanta called Yashtavakra Gita or Samhita. There we find a very important statement. When we know that all the common elements of life can really be resolved to the subtle elements of nature, which Samkhya classifies only in 5 ways, then all our ignorance vanishes. This is the importance of this chapter. Once we know the nature of nature itself, all our ignorance vanishes. We are suffering from ignorance. The antidote is only knowledge. This is the position. And so we find these important distinctions being made, and we get a very clear idea what constitutes Prakriti, what constitutes the knower of the field, described variously as Prakriti and Purusha. But the most important statement in all this, which comes very early on in this chapter, is, know me, says Krishna, to be the knower in all the fields. Not just in your personal field, but all the fields. You can take it in varying ways, but all the fields means all the multiplicity that we see. And a quick analysis from a pure mind will understand that to perceive anything, 2 things must be there. This consciousness that David Chalmers is calling the hard problem is only because nobody's asking this question. Who knows it? Supposing somebody declares, I don't believe in God. Very nice. Who knows it? Who declares it? It's a very old argument to the Buddhists also, to say, we don't believe in any fixed thing. No Atman, nothing is there, only a flux of change, only a momentariness, that's all we have. But who knows it is the key question. And Shankaracharya would have used this in many, many dialectic arguments with the Buddhists. Who knows it is the key question. And so it's a very, very important aspect of this whole chapter. So we conclude just with a few introductory comments then on this 13th chapter, linked as it is with this particular episode in Sri Ramakrishna's life with Totapuri. My hope is that those who are not regular visitors on a Tuesday to hear this Bhagavad Gita, it's not too late, because the 13th chapter starts a whole new section. And this is the most important piece of literature that we can find in terms of scripture. It is, firstly, it is the shortest scripture. Amongst all the world's scriptures, this is the shortest. We don't have to sort out what is sand, what is sugar. We like to taste sugar because it's sweet, but we don't know what will be abrasive to our teeth and what is not. We have to sort many different things out. But this goes right to the heart of it. And then when we study this in connection with Kathopanishad, which brings out some ideas not mentioned in this Bhagavad Gita, namely that part of the field is 3 states of consciousness. 3 states of consciousness: a waking consciousness, a dream, and a dreamless sleep. The dreamless sleep having the most wonderful creative potential within it. But this also constitutes the field. And the witness is there, standing. A whole Upanishad is dedicated to this subject. The Mandukya Upanishad is dedicated, with its 12 short verses, to this aspect of the field. And then when we see the dissimilarity between the senses, the rise and fall of the senses, what is the thing that stands when all the senses rise and fall, referring to these various states of consciousness, where the senses reappear in the form of dreams and then disappear completely. We make a transition between one state of consciousness and the other, hardly noticing the transition, gliding across the borders, no passport required, no Schengen visa required. Just going like that and hardly noticing it, and not rating any other state of consciousness very highly from the waking state point of view. So when we discover that these multiple fields are in front, some examples will be there, that the world in front can be registered as a field with its multiplicity and fragmentation available to us. We can notice many, many different things. But we are dimensionally deficient. We can only measure what the eyes see, what the ears hear, and so on. But let's take the eye as a symbol of all the senses. The eye represents a unit of vision, and we see all this multiplicity in the fields, all changing, all coordinated, all made from different component parts, all changing in the framework of time, all things occupying space. But then we can notice how the eyeball can be scratchy one moment and fresh the next. Some observer observes the eyeball. What is that? Is the next question. And then when we come to the field which sees that as a unit and sees all the multiple fields in front, the next thing we ask is, what notices that? What observes that? Something called the intellect. And for our purposes, we can say a kind of coordinating element called the ego. But this ego has no stability for it either. Sometimes it's happy, sometimes it's sad. It's all over the place, a kind of self-image there that seems to coordinate everything, but no stability from it. And who observes this? Ultimately, we're left with an ultimate datum. We cannot go beyond anything else except an ultimate observer here. A witness consciousness standing there and beaming from there. What's the practical use of this? Practical use of this is when life seems to impinge on you. Why don't you stand in that area of consciousness in a poised position? Knowing that that is your nature, why don't you from time to time, in an emergency so-called, sit in a poised, bodiless state? Why don't you withdraw to that quiet, still area, as it were, within you, and sit on God's throne and see how God beams? God made the world and saw that it was good. Why is it that we see it as bad? We are made in God's image and likeness, says the Judeo-Christian scriptures. Why don't we notice it? Why don't we stand in our rightful position and beam from there? This is an aspect which is useful for us. And you'll find once you stand there, somehow all these things get re-coordinated. And a harmony comes in. The harmony that you beam comes out as a coordination of all the life's elements. And that is why, if you know these elements as part of the field, then immediately ignorance vanishes. We leave it off for the time being. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace beyond all.